Homebrewing. I love to do it. I love to homebrew campaign ideas, world states, NPCs, magic items, spells, feats, monsters, you name it. But in the 20 plus years that I have been running games, I have noticed a dark side to homebrew. Homebrew has the potential to actually ruin D&D for you in your group, and we're going to talk about it. You're not going to want to miss this. Let's dive in. Now, you may be surprised to hear me say that there's a dark side to homebrew. You may be really surprised to hear me say homebrew can actually ruin your D&D experience. You might think to yourself, Jim Philosopher, how is this possible? Well, it is possible. I've been running a lot of games for a long time, and I have ruined sessions. I've even ruined adventures, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have flirted with ruining friendships over some of my more failed homebrew attempts. I have learned what to do and what not to do. And I'm going to share it with you very point blank in this video. This is going to be very honest. If you want to hear some honest, dark side advice about what not to do with homebrew, this is the video for you. Here at GM Philosophy, our goal is to empower game masters to run better games, and everything we do is formulated to help you do that. In fact, I recently compiled my top 10 best GM tips into an ebook that I'd like to give you for free. This ebook is titled Mastering the Game, 10 Essential GM Tips and How to Take Them to the Next Level. In this ebook, I give you my 10 most important tips for running games and being a successful game master, and then I go a level deeper, sharing some personal insights with you about each one of those tips. If you want to go from zero to hero, leveling up your games literally overnight, grab that ebook and download it while you listen to this video. All right, now let's get into the homebrew stuff. So the first big problem with homebrew is this: lack of play testing. D&D in general especially has been a system that has been rigorously play tested to help bring balance. This doesn't mean that it's perfect. In fact, you probably know that every time they come out with an edition, players find new and inventive ways to break it and make it very broken. Sometimes this poses problems for the GM, unique challenges that force the GM to say to themselves, what in the heck am I going to do now? These players, they just keep breaking the game. With that being said, that is with a play tested, a thoroughly vetted system that has gone through layers and layers and layers of protections to try to make it a very balanced system that game masters can pretty much trust, that when they give it to players and say, hey, make characters, those characters are going to be relatively balanced, and the monsters in the monster manual are going to be relatively balanced, and the rules are going to work pretty well to bring everything together, and it's just going to flow relatively well. That's the expectation, because rules give us a set of guidelines. They give us a universal language that we can use with our players to communicate about the parameters of the mechanics of the story. But what happens when that goes really wrong? Well, what happens is you start to have things break. You start to have things break immersion. Things start to break rule mechanics, rendering large swaths of the rules basically useless. And then you break the universal language and you realize that you and your players are not communicating on the same wavelength anymore. You're not even speaking the same language. You may not be living on the same planet. How are you as a game master supposed to run a balanced game that is fun, that is immersive, that is edge of your seat exciting, when players are breaking everything? But then we have another problem. What if you as the game master break the game for your players? What if you do things that are so crazy or oppressive that your players end up thinking, what is the point in me even playing? D&D was also designed and play tested to help prevent that problem. It was designed to help prevent the problem from both directions, preventing the players from breaking it, preventing the game master from breaking it. Because if either one of these things happen, you have a breakdown in fun. You have a breakdown in immersion. You're just not communicating the right way. And you, instead of building structures that help support a narrative storytelling experience, you build obstacles and barriers to that process. And what is D&D all about? Well, it's supposed to be fun, but it's fun because we work together to share a narrative, intellectual art experience. We are telling the journey of these heroes, these characters together. This is a team effort where we create a fun story. It's a truly collaborative, cooperative endeavor. And even if the players are not always aligned, we are, as people playing the game aligned in wanting to create the narrative. So characters can still be at odds with each other sometimes, but the players, the humans behind those characters, are on the same team. But when you break the game, what you have is you have people who are violating the principles that bring the game together in a cohesive way. And when these principles get violated, what do you have? It's a sort of immersion infidelity. You have people basically saying, okay, you all can keep playing by these rules, but I'm going to play by a special set of rules that say that I don't have to abide by the same rules everyone else has to play by. This is what happens when game breaking mechanics come in. And there are a lot of reasons for why this can cause bad feelings, both on the part of the players and on the part of the GM. And homebrewing brings us a risk of this, in that generally our homebrewed items, our homebrewed monsters, our homebrewed mechanics, our homebrewed feats, even our homebrewed adventures are not rigorously play tested for errors. They're not tested for balance. They're not vetted for immersion. And this can put us at a big danger point. What if the stuff we homebrew wasn't thought out well enough and the game breaks because of it? Or we end up with big plot holes because of it. Or we end up with balance issues because of it. And then what do you do to correct it? Sometimes the corrective measures can feel worse than the game breaking, and it can just exacerbate negative feelings and cause what I call feel bad moments. Now, I just said a lot. I basically just tried to lay out the premise for the problem. The dark side of homebrew is that we're introducing important game elements that are not thoroughly vetted and tested by the team who vetted and tested the core rules. And when we're talking about D&D, that's what we're talking about: the player's handbook, the monster manual, the DMG, and source materials. Now, I love to homebrew, and I love to see game masters homebrew. Please don't misunderstand this video as an attempt to get anyone to stop homebrewing. That's not what I'm trying to advocate for. What I'm trying to advocate for is that we be cautious in how we homebrew things, so that we can make sure that whatever is introduced into the game from the homebrew channel is balanced, is well thought out, is structured well, will not break the game. Emphasis on will not break the game. And the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to compare any mechanical stuff that you create to the stuff in the player's handbook or in the DMG or the monster manual, because those things have been tested. They've been rigorously play tested. For example, let's say subclasses. People can homebrew subclasses. It's become the easiest thing ever to develop really cool subclasses. And when I say easy, I don't mean easy to be creative and create subclasses. I mean, it's easy to fit a homebrew subclass into your class level up system, because the way that 2024 D&D has been laid out makes subclasses a really cool kind of like specific part of a class. And therefore, it really opens the door to awesome homebrew activities. In fact, in the Barren Lands campaign, our player Soul is playing a homebrewed subclass of a Sun Paladin that he created, which I checked for balance, and I found it to be balanced. Now, here's a question. Why did I say it seemed balanced? Here's what I did. I literally compared it to all of the other Paladin subclasses, and I asked myself one very important question. Does this subclass stand out as being more powerful than those other four? Is there any reason to play these other four if I have access to this homebrew class? In other words, is this homebrew class so good that it makes it kind of useless to play these other subclasses? If the answer is no, then you probably have a relatively balanced or even underpowered subclass. If the answer is yes, then guess what? It's time to go back to the drawing board, because that subclass is just too powerful. When we homebrew things, we tend to want to make them better. And there's a reason for that. It's because we're trying to make something awesome. But creatively awesome is different than mechanically awesome. And the truth is, it is not good for the player, and it's not good for the game to play something that is mechanically broken or mechanically too powerful. What we want is creative awesomeness. We don't necessarily want mechanical inflation. We do not want the things we create to create unsustainable, significant leaps in power creep, right? So taking the homebrew thing and then comparing it to other things. What I like to do, and this is especially true with magic items, I think to myself, okay, I want to homebrew a magic item. What's the closest thing to this magic item that exists that is published by Wizards of the Coast. Okay. Now I'm playing strictly D&D 5e. I'm playing 2014 and 2024. Right now I let my players play anything from the 2014 or the 2024 books. So, what is the most close resembling thing that is in the books or in the lore to the thing I want to create? I find it. Maybe it's a magic item. Okay. Let's say I want to create some kind of wand. Okay, what's the wand that is most similar to what I'm trying to create in like terms of power level, in terms of usefulness, in terms of like what magical abilities it uses? And then I find maybe one, two, three things that are very similar. I take them, I compare them to what I want to create. And I make sure that the thing I create is like 1 degree less powerful than these things by mechanics, but 1 degree cooler than these things in creativity, right? So I want to do some unique things. I want the story of this wand. I want the creativeness, the uniqueness of the abilities to outshine the fact that it may be technically, mechanically a little bit less powerful than these wands that were officially play tested. This brings me to a point where I generally create more balanced things, right? I have violated this rule and many times in my life at great peril. There was one incident during a big campaign, which you can find the story of that campaign here. There was a wizard, one of my characters, one of my very best friends in the world, was playing a wizard whose name was Wendell the Mad. He was a fire wizard. He loved fire-based spells. I made the grand mistake of thinking to myself, I'm going to give him a staff that will let him cast 2 spells per round. Basically, every time he casts a spell, he could duplicate it and cast another copy with a staff. But I'm going to give it a big hiccup, which will make it risky to use. I'm going to make it so it has to make a constitution save every time he uses it. And if he fails it, he gets knocked unconscious. Wow, that'll make him really think twice before using that. What ended up happening? Wendell ended up running around gathering up everything he could find by hook, by crook, by killing he was not a good character. By any stretch of the imagination, anything he could do to boost his constitution score, he did it. I have never seen a character, let alone a wizard, with such a high constitution save as Wendell ended up with. It ended up so crazy high, and this was all legitimate. He did this legitimately. The only thing not legitimate about this was the staff I gave him. It was called Staff of Twin Casting. He ended up with a constitution save so high that he literally had to fumble to fail his save. He only fumbled once the entire epic level campaign. The whole campaign, he was hurling 2 copies of every single spell he ever cast. There were a number of things I could have done to balance the staff out before I created it, but I didn't. I thought it was cool and I created it. I did not compare it to other magic items. I did not test it in my mind. I did not run through all the scenarios. I just thought it was cool. I made it and I threw it out there. Did it break the game? Let's put it this way. It made Wendell kind of a supervillain. There was a whole portion of that campaign where a whole city government locked him away in an insane asylum, specifically for maniacal magic users because he was so dangerous. He was considered an enemy of not just the state of Greyhawk, but every state in like the whole world. He became a supervillain that villains feared because he was not a good character. And he had so much power. He was literally twice as powerful as every other wizard on the planet at his level. And by the time he was able to cast 9th level spells, good luck. Good luck. Wendell was out of control. He ended up helping to save the world, but there was a lot of nonsense. He became exorbitantly more powerful than he probably should have been for his level. And the truth is, a lot of the other players also broke the game in really unique and creative ways. So it wasn't that unbalanced player to player. But the truth is that had I not been experienced with game breaking mechanics, that could have really posed a challenge for me that would have made the game unfun for me. As a general rule, I'm not super upset about players who like do game breaking things. At this point, I'm desensitized to it. I'm desensitized to it partly because of Wendell. But the point is it could have spelled grave disaster and it could have created a lot of intense feel bad moments. I'm fortunate that it didn't in that campaign. Partly because of my skill level as a GM, not to toot my own horn, but also partly because I was playing with a lot of really cool players. These players were mature players who focused more on the story than on mechanics. That also plays into it. The more mature your group is, the more forgiving broken homebrew magic items can be. But I digress. The point is that I have done this, and you always want to compare, you always want to test. You want to make sure that you're not creating things that are going to totally break the game. But magic items isn't where it stops. Let's talk about how homebrewing plots, plot arcs, and adventures can go wrong. It can be surprisingly easy for plots to go wrong for two reasons. Number one, just writing plots in general can be tricky. It can be really easy to kind of start improvising things and then to have a uh-oh moment when you realize that the things you improvised aren't leading where you kind of thought they were, or when you realize that you didn't think about the end result as you started improvising. And then it can make a lot of your clues, a lot of the things that happen seem like, why did that happen? What was the point of that? It could almost seem like the plot doesn't fit with itself. This can happen a lot. These are called continuity errors, and not all players will pick up on them, but it can be really awkward when GMs make big continuity errors and then players do pick up on them. It can be very embarrassing and it can really hurt immersion. But here's another place where, like, not necessarily preparing plot arcs, adventures, and storylines like very well from a homebrew sense can go wrong. It can go wrong because when you homebrew a storyline arc and you don't do it correctly, you can really pigeonhole yourself into needing to railroad the party. And of course, railroading for the most part feels bad. Most groups will accept a certain baseline level of railroading, but it always kind of sucks and it always feels kind of bad. No player wants to feel like they're being railroaded. Players want to feel like they're going on the adventure they want to go on. They want to feel like they're telling the story of their character and that they have the freedom to tell that story. And even if they put up with a certain level of railroading, nobody really likes it. Let's be super honest. I don't want to feel like I'm being railroaded. And I hate it when my players feel like they're being railroaded. It just is a feel bad all around. It's just super feel bad for me as a GM. So how do we fix this? How do we fix this? This is a huge potential problem when you homebrew plot arcs and stories. For me, the way I fix this is I decide what's going to happen in my world regardless of anything else, and I decide it. What is this villain going to do? What are these NPCs going to do? What's this faction going to do? What's the government going to do? Like, that is all plotted out, kind of the sequence of events and how they would act and blah, blah, blah. The players get to choose whether they get involved or not. They're going to find clues that lead to that storyline. That storyline is going to play out unless the players get involved and change it. Now, that can happen. And if that happens, then okay, the clues moving forward will change as a result. I just stay really on top of that, and I don't let player involvement lead to continuity errors. But homebrewing storylines, homebrewing adventures is very dangerous for continuity errors because sometimes we get caught up in like the adventure moment. Like, you think to yourself, it'd be really cool if the rogue found a skull coated in gold with rubies for eyes in the chest, and they open it up. And then they say, I want to investigate. What do I think this comes from? And you think to yourself, I'm going to tie it to that local faction. That would just be cool. So you do it. Not a bad idea. Maybe not a bad idea at all. But then when they do that, then the players start asking, why would that faction have things hidden down here in this temple of so-and-so god? And you realize suddenly, oh, actually, they probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't have things hidden down here in the temple of the so-and-so god. See, these are the kinds of situations I'm talking about. This is where homebrewing, plot lines, and storyline arcs can lead you in a weird direction. It can lead to either continuity errors on one end or railroading on the other. And to be really honest, I like to absolve this by just deciding what's going to be found where and thinking through it first. Yeah, I might say, yes, they're going to find a skull coated in gold. But then when the temptation comes up, make it about that faction. I'll know better because I've plotted out like what's going to go on in the world. I'll think to myself, no, that wouldn't make sense. They wouldn't find that here. It's just a gold skull. I'm going to resist the temptation to build webs that I can't support with continuity, right? But that's the homebrew risk of building plotline arcs, is continuity errors, or you find yourself having to cram the players down a railroaded path, and that just feels bad. It feels super bad. At the end of the day, I think that the message here is this. Homebrew, yes. I love homebrewing. I think all game masters should homebrew a lot. In fact, I applaud game masters who do a lot of homebrewing things because homebrewing does a lot of really good things. Homebrewing presents players with stuff they've never seen before because it's never been published. And that is some of the best stuff. Just be careful when you homebrew so you don't delve down that dark road of creating something unbalanced, breaking the game, or creating continuity errors. If you can avoid doing those things and you can just stick to creating things that are balanced, things that fit, and a lot of times, here's what it boils down to. Just think about it for a few days. Instead of just throwing something out randomly, spend a few days in prep thinking about what you're going to give your players in that next session and then plan it out beforehand. This will save you a ton of problems down the road. And in my opinion, this is the best way to avoid any kind of problem with homebrewing stuff. So boom. There you go. I want to give a big shout out to all of our Ko-Fi members who support the channel and make the magic happen, especially our gold supporters. Craig, who is our latest gold supporter, thank you so much for supporting the channel and for giving back and helping GM Philosophy to continue the journey and the mission of helping game masters to run better games. And with that being said, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. Roll some D100s for me at your next game, and I will see you awesome people on the next one.